Welcome to Creative Conversations, where I have amazing conversations with people that I love and trust around things that affect organizing and productivity, as well as our creativity. And today I'm joined by my dear friend and client, Anna Marie. And we've talked for years and years. We've had so many amazing conversations. I keep telling her we should have recorded all of them, but we finally got to it today. So here we go. Let's jump right in. The question was going to be,
Mm,
what is creativity really, and how does it relate to us as small business owners? And, how does it affect us in different ways? There's so many angles to that: marketing, emotional
mhm,
well-being, physical well-being, and I feel like it's a topic that nobody really talks
mhm,
in terms of
mhm.
small business. Like it's always strategy. But to me, the creativity infuses the strategy. So that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this with you, because I know you and I align on that very well.
It's funny because I just go so much from the creative, and you don't, it's like the water that you're swimming in. You don't know that's the water that you're swimming in until sometimes you meet other people that aren't coming from that place. So for me, it's all just the creative, the intuitive, the taking space for things to drop in, and then the strategy and things come, from that place. And often for me, the creative comes from my own personal struggle. And so it's learning and seeing how can I how can I try and remedy that in myself? And then how can I then create that in a way that I can then share with more of a wider community and collective? So it's kind of often coming, as I realize, from a personal place of there's something missing or there's something lacking. I mean, that's how I met you,
Yeah.
reaching complete digital overwhelm
And
and
I'm glad you
going
did, because otherwise we wouldn't have met.
and going. And that was when I was in my flat in London, living a very different life, like running a business that, had reached a kind of transition point, but just having accumulated so much and going there and just feeling so overwhelmed. There must be such a thing as a digital organizing coach. And then going, digital organizing coach. And then I remember you saying that's when you just invested in your SEO, right?
Yeah, I put a lot of time and effort into my SEO.
At
Yeah.
that particular point, lucky for me, because that meant that then we could meet, and then the rest is history in terms of that
Yeah.
journey that we've been on into our creativity and
Yeah.
how that's interwoven with the organizing and how the two are in this like beautiful dance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
For
funny. I remember our first chat very clearly.
yeah.
I don't know if I've told you this, but I was a little intimidated by you. You were so beautiful and so articulate and so successful. And I was like, I don't know if I can help. She seems like she has it all together. But then, I think the more we dug down, we found some bottlenecks and we found some things that we could, work on in terms of streamlining and making you feel a little easier around it. And I think there was just a lot of changes happening, I think, around
Mm,
that time that may have
yeah.
contributed to some of the overwhelm too.
Yeah, it was a big transition point. I think I knew I didn't want to live in a big city anymore as well. And there was all the reorganizing that goes with
Yeah.
downsizing and the aspects of we should always be growing and bigger and your company should be always expanding and that whole growth mindset that is just so part of our Western culture and like the industry to kind of keep more is better and keep churning things out. And I just reached an end point, in that. And then, yeah, and then there is that process of reorganizing and recombobulating, as I often say. But I think, what you say then as well of that, there's so much often a perception, right? People on the outside think you've got everything all sorted and sussed and, present a certain way, not knowing the reality of what it's like inside. And I think that is often the journey of a small business owner and an entrepreneur. and a creative person is,
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think most of the time you literally don't know, you don't really know where you're going.
No, and I think that's one of the things that I'm always impressed with creative people and entrepreneurs. It's they have this inherent trust in the
Mm.
future that it's going to be okay. I don't know where I'm going, but I know it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
That safety net that is sometimes missing, you know?
Mm.
But
Mhm.
entrepreneurs, they just have that belief usually in themselves that, oh, I figured stuff out before. I'm going to be able to figure this one out too. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Or
way.
even, and also it's like maybe, I know that I don't really trust myself. You've seen me kind of being in this like, I don't really know, but then you develop the tools and the
Exactly.
practices, don't you? And the support. And I love spirals, obviously, it's emblazoned on my top. But
Yeah.
for me, that the spiral journey is one of creativity, which is the path of all things in nature inherently follow a spiral path of expansion and contraction. But when you're entering a spiral, you don't know where you're going. You don't know what's around the corner. You literally, you can't see. And I think that is the creative way. But then there's also the need to, which is something I've worked with you on a lot of times, which is that kind of just having those goals and that vision for the next step and then the next step. And then it's that very intuitive feeling in. And then, as you've taught me as well, that kind of learning to take pause moments all along that spiral journey to reflect what's working, what's not working, and do that post-production job within the project cycle.
Yeah.
Um, to really learn and process and compost, which is exactly how nature works again in that seasonality of spirals, to process the creative information to then inform the next spiral and then that next
Yeah.
growth phase, whether that is to grow, whether that's to scale back.
Well, and it's really interesting because that's the one of the main objectives that I hear from people who are creative is that, oh, I can't plan. I can't plan it at all.
Mm.
I don't know what the future holds. So I
Yeah.
can't go into, I have to jump into production right away. I have to do all, there's no way I can plan anything.
Mhm.
It's kind of a free for all because I don't have all the answers up front. And I've never said, like, look, we have to have all the answers up front. You're never going to have all the answers up front. You're
Mm.
actually going to find more answers as you start and as you keep going, right? But you have to start somewhere. And I think one of the reasons where a lot of people, you know, don't take as much action as they should is because they're they're putting too much emphasis on the finished product instead of
Yeah.
destination, right? Instead of the journey. So it's like we can just make the best decisions with the information we have available right now. Can we answer some questions so that that first step doesn't become as daunting or as scary? And then,
Mhm.
like, as we, like what you were saying with the spiral, as we get going, now we refine and we revise the goals and the plans and all of that, right? So it's that spiral journey, exactly like you were talking about it. But
Yeah.
it doesn't mean you can't plan anything, you know? It's
Yeah.
all or nothing.
Well, and a big part of how I feel, our journey together, and certainly the way I've started working, is that I think that again, that bringing in those pauses and
Yeah.
just that it creates more intentionality as to how you work and real and becoming more realistic. Again, a word that maybe creatives often are slightly allergic to, but just that realistic nature of how much time and capacity do you have to be really intentional and deep about the projects that you're birthing and the things that you're creating and the capacity that you have. And I stumble with this all the time because I've got, as you know, gazillion, squillion ideas, as most creative people do, because there's a lot of problems to solve on the earth at this time, and to try and do that in a creative way and to really be of service, you want to be doing loads of different things, but actually how much capacity do you have, to protect those creative gifts? You need to try and work in a way that honors that your capacity. And when I look at how many projects I've got on, and that's, personal or work or creative, I can often see, oh, well, I can't do all of those. And, there's a sadness in me sometimes that I can't, but at least I'm not going to frazzle myself to an oblivion by trying to do them all. And yet, yes, I still do. But,
Well,
we learn and we continue.
it's interesting because I feel like, the creatives, they have that superpower, right, of all those big, beautiful ideas. And there's so
Mm,
many that it can be hard to know which one to focus on. So I always just think of impact. It's like, it's not that you can't do a ton of projects. You can, you just can't do them all at the same time.
yeah.
And you just have to figure out the right order of things. So like,
Mm,
which one has the most impact for you right now? You know, which one is
yes.
the right one to do now? It's not that you can't do it ever. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like you said, it's just about like capacity of what can you take on now to create the most impact and the most ROI for yourself,
Hmm.
without feeling frazzled. And we all know like some ideas need to bake and marinate a little bit more, you know? Like I have some ideas around, an album I want to create. I know it's not the time for it now. I'm not there yet, but I
Yeah.
know I have some ideas around what that's going to look like at some point. So I just keep collecting ideas and notes and
Mm-mm.
that gathering phase of, grabbing information. Like I love that phase too, because that's where you have all the possibilities. That's where everything is, you haven't defined exactly what it's going to look like. So it could be anything. And I love being in that stage. I know that that can also seem overwhelming, but
Mm.
I think you narrow it down as you go.
Well, I'm a big believer, Elizabeth Gilbert speaks to this in Big Magic, the book, that we have these creative ideas come to us literally, we've all had that moment in a shower or, when we're maybe having some downtime on holiday or even when we're working, but we get these kind of creative ideas and it's almost like they come to us, to say, hey, are we going to collaborate? Are we going to create something together, and bring something from that ethereal world into manifestation? And I think when you acknowledge them and write those down, even if you're not actively working on them, you kind of give them that space to say, oh yeah, you're there, I know you're there, and I'm going to come back to you at some stage when I've got more capacity. I mean, certainly though, I think that sometimes the danger, and this is how I like to help some of my coaching clients, is when those one day projects are always on the one day list and they don't ever bump up because of maybe those more instantly gratifying or tangent projects, or someone comes in with a brief and you respond, and it's so much easier to respond to someone else's brief or timeline or deadline
Yeah. Yeah.
than the ones that just really come, from that deep creative well within you, that deep place. And it's challenging, isn't it, when you start to see those ones and you're like, oh, I still haven't done that. And I've got a children's book that I've written, and I can't. I just, I'm still not putting it on the front line, but you just got to trust, and it's still there, and I'm still giving it little bits of time and love, but it's
Yeah.
not yet.
Not yet. Yeah. Well, I feel like most projects tend to actually be birthed when it's the right time for them because
Yeah.
the time for them, you intentionally feel it and you act on it. And
Hmm.
I feel like sometimes if a project stalls or if we're not able to complete it, it's because we don't have all the information that we need somehow.
Hmm.
I just have that belief that when the time is right, it's gonna come.
Hmm.
And actually,
Yeah.
it's funny because when I put out one of my first courses, I had the whole thing recorded and ready to release. I did not have a name for it.
Mm.
Did not have a name for it. And then 3 days before launch, I was like, I gotta figure out a name. What am I gonna name this course? I took a walk and it came to me.
Yes, exactly.
And so, you know what I mean? Like since that day, I've always had that trust that, oh no, it's gonna come to me. It'll work itself out. So, you know, it's sometimes funny. You can't really predict when those creative downloads come. And sometimes you
No.
earlier. But
Yeah. Well,
but
it's like it's being in that receiving mode, isn't it? It's my big one is my outdoor bath that I've told you about. That's little. my little oasis where I try not to take, my phone. I did want to watch a film in there though, that was really good. But, I try not to have digital devices and just, we step away from the screen. And we're so screen based, aren't we now? And that's really great. But actually when we take those spaces, those pause moments again, or we're in nature or we're swimming or, we're in the bath or, we're walking the dog, stroking the cat. It's like that's when I think we're in that mode to receive, and we so often are in that doing mode and that, more linear kind of outcome place. And actually, again, it's that dance between those two kind of ways of being that are both important, and they both need each other to become, real. Like you can't be swimming around in that possibility and dreams, ideas without then stepping into the, okay, right, I'm going to break this down into lots of tiny steps. And that's again something that I've definitely learned from working with you, which is those, breaking it right down. And kind of, again, it's something I share with my clients, just like, right, let's take this creative project and, break it right down, because often people will have their first thing on their list will be, you know, draw the entire children's book. And it's like, no, the first step is get the pens out, or even buy the pens in the first place. And you got to break it down, because these things can just feel so big. But again, there's only so many things you can break down at one time, right? You literally, that's how our lives are, and we don't even realize there's a gazillion things going on
It's
before we can actually
amazing how easy it is to overestimate what you can do in a day, right?
yeah,
Then
yeah.
you underestimate how much you can create over a long period of time.
Mm,
It's just amazing. I think was it Dory Clark, I think, that said that. It's like we are so good at overestimating our short term and then underestimating our long term. And I think that's a
mm,
really important shift to make, is the long term thinking, right? Of how can I make this an impactful project, like you said, that is of service to other people,
mm,
that helps other people. Because otherwise, what's really the point?
yeah.
At least as a creative, that's how I feel. Like if I'm going to put something out there, it's going to make a difference.
Hmm.
I want it to be substantial, but
Hmm.
you can't do that overnight, because nothing substantial comes overnight like that. I mean, unless you're a super genius. It has happened, but
Yeah.
it's very hard to do that, because we have so much other things um
Mm.
attention. But you know what? I want to get your take on, because I wrote down something that I heard from Robert Greene. I don't know if you're familiar with him, the author.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so he had a really cool take on what creativity is and how
Hmm.
you become your most creative self. And I
Mm,
wrote it down because I was like, "Ooh, this is really good." So he said the first thing is you have to have and stay connected to your childlike presence,
mm, mhm.
because then you're really in that mode where you're free from judgment. Because as
Yeah.
we get worried
Mhm.
about what other people will think, right? So that was number one. The
Mm,
second one that applied, to what I do as an organizing and productivity coach, he said, you have to be, like a sponge, and you have to have a learning mindset. You're always interested in learning new things, and then you have that knowledge organized and compartmentalized in your brain so you can pull from it when you need to.
mhm, mhm.
Filing cabinet almost. And then the third one was the ability to get into a flow state, and
Mhm.
letting yourself go there and pull from that file cabinet, and not overthink that, but actually trust that, oh, I'm going to be able to access and pull out the ideas that matter. So those three things in combination, he said, is what makes a real, like, super creative brain and super creative
Mm.
person. I'm curious as to what you think of that, if you agree or disagree.
I definitely agree. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I feel the subject of creativity, and again at the beginning, I talk about when you're swimming in the water, you don't even realize, what it is, or it's just always the way that I've been, so I don't know how you would look at it objectively from the outside. But I think that the need to be playful and experiment without expectation of outcome is absolutely key. And I think as creatives who've worked in, my first paid job, at art school, you're just exploring and playing and, experimenting with all different materials and, it's great. And then you have to get a job. And then your job has briefs and outcomes. And quite quickly, that experimental free flow way is kind of taken away, I would say, or just chipped away at, I suppose, over the years. So the need to cultivate that, whether that's outside your job or then within your job, constantly to be just, yeah, like being curious. I mean, I would say curiosity is like, and that links to that childlike way, when you're walking along the street. And my mum was kind of tells me about how I was as a child. I would literally like zoom in with little eagle eyeballs on a kind of on a a tiny little bit on a leaf, and then looking and seeing the patterns and the details and the shadows and the textures and following a thread and that leading to something else, and just letting yourself, yeah, be playful. And again, that non-critical voice. And again, unfortunately, I think that gets quite loud quite early on, at school, telling yourself you're not creative or because you can't draw, whereas actually, just allowing yourself to be playful and be kind to yourself as you go, I think is just so key and so difficult. That is it's the and I run a lot of creative workshops, and one of the ones that I love is marbling. So we use these beautiful swirling inks on paper. And what I love about running those, I mean, I've run them all around the world, different kinds of groups, from um, neurodiverse groups to groups of engineers at Google to, creative teams in businesses, or I've done some for the elderly. And you see this kind of, there's always this moment of the fear of that blank page, the fear, and then that, and I can see them almost stricken going, but I haven't created something since school, and or I haven't done something, since art school, and then I went and got a job, and there's almost like a wound, a creative wound, that when they go into this workshop and it's designed in a very particular way and it's very gentle, but by the end they have made something, and I can guarantee they will make something that is beautiful. And to see the power of something beautiful and of creativity to enliven the soul and to remind them that they are inherently creative. And I think everyone is. We just lose it. I think Picasso had a beautiful quote like that. It's like everyone's born an artist. But the problem is we forget as we grow up. That I've definitely mashed that together. But it's, we do lose that inner artist for whatever reason. And I think when we can retrace it through beauty and through curiosity and through play and experimentation without expectation or judgment, that's really powerful. And I think I guess I like to cultivate that space, whether that's in my coaching, whether it's my own art practice as an artist, or whether it's in the workshops that I hold and spaces that I hold, to help that, because it's so alchemical, and you see someone going in with that is the right brain, isn't it, or the left brain, the kind of ordered, no, wants to seek outcomes and everything's in a separate box. And then when they activate that right side, the flow state, and they go into that state of flow, and at that, the research from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who popularized the flow state work, is all about that sense of when you're doing something and the all sense of time and outcome and expectation just evaporate, and you go into somewhere that is timeless and creative and unbounded. And I think the more time we can drop into that space, and again, there's research about that, isn't there, around deep work. We need to go and switch off and go deep in order to access that creative space. But so often we're kind of living on the surface and we're doing itty bitty things. And again, as a creative, that I'm always working with, how can I make my environment set up and my work life set up so I can get more deep time. And it's quite rare, but I'm working on that again because it's so necessary.
So yeah, I think that's a big key to this. And I think that's why it's so important to, as a creative, actually have a hold on project management.
Yes, absolutely. Gosh.
Because otherwise you end up always being in this surface level area,
Hmm.
with all of these broad ideas, but you miss the chance to go deep. And especially nowadays, because everybody's like, oh, when I get that one day, I'll set aside that one day and I'll get to it. And that day doesn't come. We all know
Yeah,
we're waiting for some imaginary ideal day where we're, all of a sudden going to have all the time in the world to do that course or read that book or whatever. And it just doesn't come, right?
yeah.
So it's a classic sign that you're overcommitted. You know,
Hmm.
can't go deep into anything. So I
Yeah.
and I love what Robert Greene said about, organized knowledge, because I think knowledge management is such a big underrated field, right?
Yeah.
For creatives especially. Um,
Yes, my
I see
gosh,
it all the
absolutely.
time, with my clients and friends that oh, where did I put I had a great idea. Where did it go again? And it's like when you get
Mm.
those gems, those creative downloads, like we need to honor them and make sure that we hold on to them like they were meant for us. Like we got that idea for a reason and now we got to do something with it. But you
Hmm.
got to kind of grab onto it and not let it, fall to the side. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It brings up another thought too. One of my friends said, like, because I asked him about inspiration, of like what inspires you, and he was saying, well, I know when I don't have it, when I don't feel inspired, and usually it's because I've been inside too much with my devices.
Yeah.
When I go outside for a walk
Hmm.
or whatever, like what you said, you're in that reception mode. He's like,
Yeah.
that's ideas tend to come. So I also think that that's so important, especially for those who maybe feel like they're stuck creatively, or maybe they feel like they're lacking creative ideas, or if there's like a block somewhere. I think
Hmm.
what you said, like just getting outside and exploring and playing, like that tends to unlock a lot of things, and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, and it's almost again that power of a movement, moving the body, and that kind of speaks to creativity as something quite emotional, right? And I think that I don't know who said it, but that um energy in motion. So it's like emotion is energy in motion, and that to me is creativity. The two are one and the same. And actually, when we're out and we're moving and we're breathing and we're in nature and we're just letting our kind of ideas, or not even in nature, but we're dancing or whatever it means to get that body moving and that energy moving and spiraling up
Yeah.
through us, but then to your point, then to be able to have almost the safety net of having an organized system to then come out the other end and go, I've had this idea and I'm still working on this. I wouldn't say that's my, area of genius like you. But to have that organized architecture to then support those creative ideas and not feel like you're going to lose them and they're just going to disappear into nowhere. But actually to kind of harvest and again, compost those ideas, whether that's for now or that's for later. Because I think one of my dangers is I'll have a lot of ideas, but then you might start, or I might start pushing them down because I'm like, oh, there's too many ideas. But actually, to kind of give yourself that permission and then to have that system of organizing is really that's really
Make it
powerful, I
come,
think.
but being confident that you can hold it, basically.
Yeah, exactly. To have that container within yourself. And it makes me think of Julia Cameron's amazing, The Artist's Way, and I did that I think like 3-4 years ago,
Yeah.
and how she speaks to the visual nature again, like and I'm such a visual person, and Patternity started with just it being a visual archive, before Instagram, and
Yeah.
we're so visual now digitally, but there's such an importance, I think, of still being visual as we just go about outside. We need to, and she talks about filling up our creative well. I think she uses that term, but we need to be filling up the well of imagery that we're seeing, because we get inspiration through our eyes, through visual ways. I mean, obviously, if you can't see, then you can hear inspiration, and there's touch, and there's all the senses, and actually all the senses need to be engaged, I think, to be fully creative. But she talks about going and just play nourishing our child self. So we need to go out and do something. She calls them the artist dates, doesn't she? Where you go and you might go and get like a milkshake, or you might go to an old, and it was ideally, it's not something that your adult self would do, like maybe go to a gallery or a restaurant. It's actually that child self that needs just the inspiration from places that you wouldn't necessarily go to, like an old theme park. And then that links to there was a definition of creativity that just came back to me, which is, I think it's Edward de Bono, who talks a lot about creativity, and he describes creativity as the ability to um, find patterns, make connections, and generate solutions, which I quite like. And
which
it's maybe a little bit,
which is
yeah,
organizing defined, basically.
still gonna exactly. I mean, and that's why we just have such a
Isn't
synergy, I
that
think.
amazing though? Because I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of creatives tend to rebel when I come in, with my systems, and they're like, "Ooh, I don't know if I'm gonna like this, right?" Because I don't want to be boxed in. I don't want to feel boxed in and all of that. But to me, that's what sets you free because it's the same
Mhm.
exact thing.
Yeah, and it's that again, it's that dance of the very watery nature of creativity, the kind of just
Yeah.
expansive, infinite, kind of sprawling ideas and emotions and feelings and all of that. And then the containment systems, the architecture is what actually helps to, like swimming lanes, to kind of create the flow, doesn't it? To kind of actually enable that to be directive and not completely overwhelming. And I think, as a creative with loads of ideas, it just, yeah, I mean, it can be super overwhelming.
I think you
Mm.
just nailed it. I think it's directing it. It's
Yeah.
letting it flow. Otherwise, like if it spills everywhere, like it's not really going to help, right? It's going to become that thin layer of water, right? But if you can direct it, you can make so
Yeah.
much impact. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
makes me think of a fire hose, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Can't put out fire if the hose doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like it needs to be directed. And I feel
Yeah.
the same way with creativity. It's like we can have all of this beautiful inspiration, all these ideas, but we need to somehow be able to
Mhm.
shine that flashlight somewhere and make like give it a purpose. And that's how you make
Absolutely.
impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because if it was just spraying all out, it would just not, or it might dampen the fire. And I think
Yeah.
that it can just feel very unsatisfying to have,
Yeah.
and I think that kind of confidence coming through completion aspect, it's like we need to kind of close off those projects as well. And this is where that interweave of, the boundaries, the personal work is just, one and the same with being a creative entrepreneur, because you're not just being given your job and going in and doing what you're being told. You're having to really go from your feeling and intuition to kind of create the boundaries around yourself to be able to give yourself the permission to do the deep work. And that requires you to cultivate the muscles to say no to the things that you don't want to do, or the giving away of all your time, and it's the inner work. That's when it really gets to the inner work of the confidence to do that and the blocks. And that's something that we've talked about loads, and how, those two things go in parallel, don't they? Because you need to cultivate that inner trust and confidence and knowing and strength to follow that creative path.
Yeah.
Else it becomes the hose again, and you're just giving all your energy away, and you're not left really with anything at the end of the day. And we all know how that feels when we realize we've done that, and then it's kind of going, right, okay, here I go to work on that a little bit more. And
Yeah.
that's lifelong work, I think. That is for me. And we've talked about that with people pleasing and
There's a lot of that. There's a lot of boundaries and things to work
yeah,
on in all of this. I think that comes into play no matter what you do. But
yeah.
what I was going to say is I think that what makes you successful as an entrepreneur, in my opinion, I mean, I feel like when you have that ability to harness both sides of I
Hmm.
know that I can go into my creative state come up with all these brilliant ideas for marketing or for sales or whatever it might be. Because in my opinion, marketing is an inherently creative task. Like it's
Yeah.
you need to be able to understand and come up with new and interesting ideas to present offers and services and all of that, right? So that's a very creative thing to do. But then you also need to have that, other side to you where it's like, right, now it's time to get something done. Now it's time to have the system and complete the process and do all these things to get things done, right? So that it
Yeah.
doesn't float. And having that sense of not only gathering the water, right, but also then directing it where it needs to go. Um,
Mhm.
and I feel like that's something that I've practiced a lot over the years. And I think I've been on both sides where I was lacking the creativity early on
Yeah.
and then
Hmm.
lacking the structure early on. But now I feel like I have both, and
Mm.
that has made a huge difference for me. Because
Yeah.
I feel like it's awareness of like where you're falling short. Sometimes we tend to work on only what we're good at, right? But it's like figuring out
Hmm.
what you're not good at and working on that makes the difference.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's that connection to yourself to know, am I too much in that watery place, or have I fallen too much in that kind of only brain, head on a stick kind of brain, just doing the kind of regimented bits and bobs, whereas that, it's like, and it is the union, it's the union of the two, and that's, as we've had conversations about this before, that for me, my interest in that is that's much wider. That's a really expansive topic. Look at the world that we're in that is on autopilot, must do more, must grow more, must kind of, extract from the planet. And
Yeah.
that very uh kind of machine-like way of being where everything's in separate boxes and in separate parts and is only using that one part of the brain and isn't holistic, we're seeing where that is getting us to, because it's on a direct mission to say big is better, more growth, but infinite growth on a finite planet just doesn't make sense. So when that autopilot is not in service to something that is so much around us being part of the earth and and collective experience and nature being at the forefront of our world and community and all those much more creative, intuitive um, ways of being that honor nature and honor the environment and honor that everything is interconnected and interwoven in this way that our brains actually can't compute. But when that sense of, okay, well, what would that world look like if that was the kind of up here piece, and then the kind of the organizing and the structure then comes to support that. That's a really interesting world. That's a world that I want to really be a part of and I want to see.
I would,
Um,
yeah.
and I feel like we are in our and everyone again in that world, everyone plays their part. In the other world, it's a top-down dominant power system, and that is where again that way of being is kind of running its course. I think certainly from what I see, that leadership, it's got to shift to something much more community-based, much more intuitive, much more relational, co-created, and that is that other place that I think needs to be that dominant way in the world. And that's within small work teams, that's within big institutions, that's within education. I think we're just experiencing a changing of the guard,
Yeah.
um, to that more intuitive way, it
Yeah.
feels, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so too. It feels really important that we make that shift sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Um, but I also think that if we bring in more creativity, and obviously that's what both you and I are trying to do for people, is like, how can we harness this in a more useful way? I think the more we infuse that side of us, that childlike side of us, I think some of that will naturally come because
Yeah.
then you're living in a simpler time, a simpler version of yourself, where you
Mhm.
have all of this outside opinions and like all the judgment and you should do this and should do that. You know what I mean? Like it's a simplified version of your consciousness at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think there's that not knowing an outcome, but knowing a feeling of how something's feeling and being really connected to yourself and knowing, again, not being on autopilot, but really thinking, how's this feeling and does this feel good? Does this feel right? Sorry, my dog was all scrabbling around then. Um, and you don't know what one project is going to lead to. Often it's through doing that project, and that's that experimentation piece
Yeah.
that then leads to, a new learning or a development that then leads to that meeting that person that then leads to that. And, it is a meandering journey. And I think life is a meandering journey. It's not a straight line. And we do go through these cycles where sometimes we feel like we're going back on ourselves and we're receding, but actually maybe that's just that new phase of growth that's coming through. And it's just that taking those pause moments on those spirals up, um, we're always learning and we're always growing and we're always changing and the world is changing around us. So nothing can be
No,
kind
no.
of,
It changes so fast. And you know that. That's why I teach so much, of my reflection routines.
yeah,
Constant, evaluation, basically, of where is this going? Is this going where I want it to go? Or like, do I need to shift, right? Because otherwise, by the time you notice, you're way off course,
yes, yeah.
right?
Yeah, and you've already kind of maybe built things in that then need to want to wriggle out of or however it might be, but it's before something gets too late to really look and see. I mean, again, if only we could be doing a reflection on the way the world is right now, a world that's divided, but actually what would it, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, we're gonna have to record another one, I think, on that
Yeah.
really interesting topic that you and I haven't gotten as deep
Mm,
in. But actually, I'm curious to hear when you work with somebody who is creatively stuck,
mm,
you know, if you have any gems to share around like, what you talk about. Because for me, it's like, well, usually I kind of want people to shake themselves loose and just go have fun and do something new, try something new. Like again, that experimentation, that playfulness. I find that
yeah.
usually where you realize something about yourself. I remember I was in Puerto Rico and we went, ATV riding through the jungle. And I had more creative downloads on that ride than I had had in years.
Yeah.
So much fun. And I realized some fundamental things at that point. I was like, oh, wow, like I need to do this more often because I had so much fun. And it did shake loose something in me that had been stuck. I just didn't know that it was stuck at the time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, doing something that, and as we're talking, I mean, it's reminding me that you need to do this. That's going back to what your child self would have loved to do, and doing things that push you out of a comfort zone. But maybe, I mean, the other day, I did. I put my dog, as you know, I kind of feel like she should make an appearance at some stage, but she's sleeping just to my left. But we'd entered a dog agility at a local fete the other
Oh,
day, and it was a really exhilarating experience because it was actually quite scary because all these people were looking, it reminded me of being back at school doing like I was a competitive swimmer, but and the pressure, talk about swimming lanes of like going to be on the lanes and the gun going off and everyone looking. So it was like that, but I knew it was just going to be really fun and silly and like no one cares who wins, and certainly my dog doesn't care. She's like, what's going on? And it was movement, which is great, but it was this feeling of like, oh my God, I'm kind of exposing myself here to everyone looking at me. But like literally nothing bad could happen. I could have fallen over and it wouldn't have mattered. And I think there's something really freeing, particularly when you have maybe complexity around being seen. And my God, I certainly have and still continue to do. And again, people wouldn't think that from the outside. I'm sure they wouldn't think that about me because I've done press and interviews and, but I really, really, really do, as you know, having, many years of conversation. But there's something of doing those things or just that open you out, it makes you think of like bungee jumping or, just doing those things or you on that ride. It's like they just take you into that place of expression that's maybe not even linked to your creativity. So it takes that freedom. It's not about sharing your book proposal. It's actually just you and your body being a human being and honoring that and celebrating that. And I think that's a big part of why we're met here as humans, is to enjoy being a human.
I think you said something really important there that I kind of want to just bring up again. I think part of the key to getting unstuck is letting yourself feel exposed in some way. And I'm obviously
Yeah.
talking about, you know, wholesome exposure here. Like
Go to
what I'm
the
saying is, you know what I mean? Because I
yeah.
think, as you have grown up, you've realized that the world judges you and this and that, right? And so what you said is like you felt that pressure of people watching you and all of that. I think if you can get to a point where you can just do something new and let yourself be seen and not
Yeah.
about the outcome, that's when you're accessing that childlike part of yourself that's just having fun and just playing. I mean, look, I embarrass myself all the time, but you know what? It's on the house. I don't care. I've reached a point where I'm just gonna have fun, and I'm the
Mhm.
most creative I've been in years because of that. Because
Mhm.
I'm not letting myself take on all of that pressure. Does that make sense? It's like letting
Yeah,
your,
definitely does.
I think that really accesses that part of yourself.
And
That
it's that, and yes, totally. It's that playfulness, isn't it? It's the really, and I feel like if the universe has like an energy, I feel like it would be, or I like to feel it would be one of like light playfulness and lightness. And I think so often, our creative projects, they could be they could become really heavy. And I'm someone who likes the beginnings of creative projects, and I actually find the ends really difficult, or the kind of, when it gets a bit of the heavier process. But maybe there's that need to just always be trying to be in that lightness, and just to explore that in our own personal lives, or however it means to kind of keep coming to that place of lightness, the lightness of being, and yeah, like you say, that playfulness. And I mean, I come back to when I was at school. I got pulled up in front of the whole school by a teacher, and I was told to stand there, and I started to cry in front of like 300 people, and I was just on the verge of, I was kind of 15, I think. And everyone at my school would remember this because it was so shocking, and she was really mean, this teacher. And I'd done nothing. I think I'd laughed at something someone had said at the assembly, but I mean, it was really not being bad. And she pulled me to the front, and that feeling of everyone looking at me and actually feeling embarrassed for me. And then I started crying, and then the whole school. And I've spent years to try and get over that. And I think everyone has their version of something like that, whether they shared something and someone said it was terrible, or got bullied. And there's so many moments when we're really made so vulnerable, and I think it's the creative journey is a big aspect of that, is kind of to come back to that child self and to give that some love and to keep nourishing it, which is why it makes sense that we need to go into that creative place just to play and experiment. And actually, that is really, actually, as we're talking, it's so key, isn't it, to re-nourishing that side? Because I think so much of that trauma when we first express ourselves is in those early years. And if
Mhm.
we can get back to that place and nourish it and love it and care for it, then it will kind of expand within us like a muscle. And all of these are muscles, whether it's the creative muscle or the organizing muscle, to start to kind of bring the things that we just, we're here to bring about, I think. And we all know it when we have something that we know we want to create. We know that feeling, and it's so frustrating when you can't. Um, isn't it? It's just
Well, and I think that's also really key. Like, I feel like most creatives are very clear on how they want to express themselves and get their work out into the world. And we know that
yeah,
most, like, we work for recognition, right? And for, I guess I don't want to say validation, but obviously that also feels really nicely, even though that's a thing you're not supposed
Mm.
to. But like it's
Yeah.
it's like most artists are very clear on what they want to do and how they want to present it, I feel like, but maybe not how. Like, how am I going to get there? And so that's the time when you remove, the child from the conversation and you go back into the adult world. And that's
Mm.
where you get things done. So it is a fine balance to be able to know when to put on which hat, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Um, because I
Yeah.
feel like a lot
Yeah.
of the successful, creatives that I work with, they are very childlike and they are always a lot in that play mode. But then, I have to kind of step in and say, okay, let's let the child play. Great, but now the adult has to be present in the room because if the adult is not present, we can't make adult decisions. And sometimes
Mm.
in order to get your creative work out, there needs to be contracts and systems and processes and sales and data and marketing and like all of that stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there's
It's yeah.
for each one.
I love that. It's that it's moving from wounded child and critic to, you know, playful, satisfied child, not satisfied child, but just like loved child or free expressing child and mentor and guide. And actually we need to be that, we need to embody those within ourselves. And we need to, like you say, know and what know when we're putting different hats on
Mhm.
in order to bring about the work. And if you are working on your own or in a small team, you really need to have that awareness of when you've got that organizer hat on, because we need to do it. I think there's that great thing, isn't there, of like, oh, I just outsource everything to everyone else, but that's not really claiming your creativity fully, I don't think, when you can actually start to learn those skills to do and bring about the work that you want to do and really make time to sit down. And not that we need to do all the things, because some things we just can't do and that are outside of our expertise, and we do need to bring people in, but even that is that adult organizer, that mentor kind of guide.
So this is definitely an adult decision. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it is about kind of bringing those two into collaboration rather than being at war with one another, right?
Yeah.
Which I imagine is that wounded child doesn't want to be told what to do and how to organize itself. Don't tell me what to do, tidy my bedroom, um, and then or leave their materials all over the place or whatever that might mean. But then the other one wants to be that kind of organizer, guide, mentor, wants to also have that softness to understand the creative. It's like there's a real beautiful way with these two, I think, that's really powerful, I think, to have that understanding of.
Yeah, and I think that's so true for a lot of creatives too, because I mean, I know I was super creative as a child and I was very rebellious because
Mm.
I didn't want to be told what to do and I was often I don't know how to say it. It's like we were not taken seriously, as artists and creatives all the time, even though the world runs on creativity, but
Mm.
it's not given, the what is the word like I don't know the credence the it's not a
That
real
was the word I was going to use.
right
Yeah,
not a
yeah,
real job. Like, like if somebody says, "Oh, I want to be, a singer or a movie star or whatever it happens to be, whatever creative job you pick," people go, "Well, you're never going to make it," or "That's not a real job. Why don't you become A, B, or C?" You know what I mean? Like it's
yeah,
not seen as a serious option. And you hear that a lot when you're younger. It's like, oh no, you got to be more realistic or whatever. And so a
mm,
lot of creatives, I feel like, grow up with that rebelliousness of, well, don't tell me what I can or can't be. Don't tell me what to do, or you know what I mean? And so they then go up and maybe they are super creative, but they don't necessarily know how to then bring the adult into the room because they're still in that wounded child phase. And so then they're not able to make it in that profession, not because of their lack of creativity or abundance of creativity or anything that has to do with that, but because
yeah,
they're still rebelling against the system and they don't know how to make the necessarily adult decisions or get
Hmm.
things done or, what contract to sign or, all of those things. So it's usually
Mm.
not about talent, right? The difference between, in my opinion, the
Mm.
people who make it versus the people who don't make it is because they can embody both of those sides.
Yes, yes, yes.
One of
Yeah.
them. Now, you're either lacking in one and you can't, get the creative done, or you can't make a living off of it because, yes, you're very creative, but you don't have any structure or systems in place to hold it for you, So
Hmm.
that's why I said before, like, I feel like the most successful people are the one that can do both and have learned how to balance it. And I think, like you said too, we have to work on ourselves a lot in order to be able to get to a place where we
Yeah.
can embody both, You have to
Yeah.
tend to that wounded child and go, it's okay. People may not have reacted the right way before, but that doesn't have to be true now.
Hmm.
It could be different now. We don't have to have that one experience that just shapes us for the rest of our lives. We can work through it. I don't know. Do you agree with that or what do you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I really agree with it. And I think there's something that's really stirring me in me at the moment around kind of reclaiming creativity in such a broad sense. I mean, I feel so strongly about it because I feel like also, but creativity truly for ourselves, and it doesn't necessarily need to mean it's for your full-time job and how you make all your money and all the rest of it. But I think I live in a really beautiful countryside place where there's a very famous, very big art gallery here. And there's a lot of people working in the kind of creative industry and doing their own artworks, but there's maybe sometimes that real block, I think, for creatives where it's like, well, if you're not going to show your work in in the Tate or in the Saatchi or at MoMA,
Yeah.
then why bother? It's like, but actually there is a whole world that's not in that place to play and experiment and explore in, but you need to be kind of consistent, I think consistent with your showing up for yourself and your creativity. But it is things like breaking down the blocks of like, well, where might you want to show your work? And obviously creativity is so much broader than just art in an art gallery. It's music, it's dance, it's poetry, it's gardening, it's looking after your pet. There's creativity in everything, right? But I think to start to really know like what, again, it's that intentionality and something I work a lot with my clients. It's like, why are you doing this project? Really getting them into the why. Why is this important? Like, why does this make your heart sing? Like, why is this something that you feel like you're here to do? And then just to really give that space and time to kind of really then think, well, it's not necessarily about showing it in this like massive art gallery, but it's starting to break that down so it doesn't have control over you to this kind of power of the big art galleries or the big record labels or whatever those are that are stopping you from going, oh well, I might as well not bother. And actually to kind of claim that for yourself, to kind of know, I have a small shop here and it's, I used to do big projects for big brands in London and flying all around the world, but there's something so powerful about doing something small. And it doesn't mean it's any less. In fact, it's far more impactful in so many ways, for me and for my community. But it's how to not be lost and stuck in that thing that to do something bigger is always better. And obviously, that's great if you are showing in those galleries. But I think there's just such a big movement of people trying to reclaim their creativity on their scale and in their and what feels good for them. But you got to know that in yourself first. And to do that, you need to take time and space.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. Well, and I think there's something that you can do that's actually very powerful, and that's to call yourself whatever it is that you want to be, even, so
Yes, yes,
what's
yes.
very important for me is to call myself a writer because I write, and that's it. Like there's no judgment around that. It doesn't
Mm.
mean, there's stuff that's published where I'm in there, I don't have my own book out yet. At some point I will. But even so, like I'm a writer because I write. It's
Yeah.
putting the emphasis, I think, on the activity rather than the accomplishment of
Mm.
getting to a specific outcome. So like what you said with the art galleries, like you can be an artist without having art in an art gallery. You can be a writer because you write. You can be a singer because you sang a song this morning. It's okay.
Yeah,
You don't
yeah.
have to necessarily make it your living or a revenue stream in order for it to be valid. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I feel like that's where a lot of people get stuck too. So it's like if you dance, you're a dancer.
Yeah,
It's valid. It
yeah.
doesn't mean that you have to be the best dancer in the world. It doesn't mean that you have to make a living at it. It doesn't mean that you have to dance every day. It just means that you dance and you love it, so you're a dancer. And I think
Mm.
a lot of us, because especially again, artists and creatives, I think we put a lot of emphasis on recognition for
Yeah.
ourselves because we haven't been validated as younger selves.
Yes,
Right.
yes,
So we're
yes.
always trying to prove or please somebody or show somebody like, oh, look, I'm a pro, or this or that, where it's like, if you say you're a pro, you're a pro, like
Yeah.
what does that mean to be a pro? You can be, like you can be a great writer, but never have published anything.
Mm.
That's a whole different, to me, that's a whole different thing. So maybe just starting with that validation, giving yourself the validation of this is
Yeah.
what I am as a creative. And then if you can get to a place where you can put your adult hat on and say, okay, you know what? I'm actually a really good writer. So let's get something out there that I can share with the rest of the world.
Mm.
That to me has been a big shift, actually.
Mm. I love that. Yeah, and the world is designed for that external validation, isn't it? With the Instagram likes and also putting ourselves into boxes and it being one box, like your little bio, but it's like we're so much bigger and broader and more expansive than those things. And there's a real beauty in that gives to give yourself permission again to play and experiment and explore and not have a set outcome in mind or
Mhm.
a set, but not to box yourself in. Um, yeah, yeah, it's a very, I think it's just such an interesting time for these kind of conversations as well, because I think we're maybe coming to a moment of just finding the limitations of things like social media. They're great tools, they're great tools, but we've drunk the Kool-Aid, and I think we're starting to want to, just step away and start to see them as tools, but not to be controlled kind of by them, not in any kind of conspiracy type way, but just that we give so much energy and focus to those things. And actually, what if we took some of that energy and focus to really enjoying what we're doing rather than scrolling and responding to every message. I mean, WhatsApp's even worse for me than Instagram now, the constant responses. And actually, how can we again find the tools to put our phone completely away? I have a box that I just put my phone away in, and that's the only time that I get good work done is when my phone is literally out and off, switched off and away from me. And I talked to you about turning it black and white a little while ago, which was a good one, good hack.
Good heck. Yeah. Yeah.
Just so it's
But
not
that,
so enticing. It's not so like, ooh, this visual, because you can just lose yourself in all these dopamine hits, right? But the real dopamine hits come when you're actually doing your creative work, not,
when you get it done. Yeah. And I
yeah.
think that's why my tagline right now is finish what you start, because
Mm.
when you get the satisfaction of putting something out or completing something, checking
Yeah.
the box like that right there, the accomplishment, it just there's nothing like it because it means that you came full circle somehow.
Yeah. You're closing the loop, aren't you? The energetic loop. And if you're always leaving those loops unclosed, it's a bit back to the fire hose again, isn't it? It's kind of all dripping. It's kind of not, you're not holding, your creativity in a container. I definitely am, I can fall into that. There's something in the closing of things that I find tricky energetically, and it's still something I'm working on because I kind of do lots of openings of things, but that closing moment is, or that final putting that out there moment is still an edge for some work for me. And I find with some of my clients, that big edge is often the work when it's the work that's really
Yeah.
dear to you. It's when it's really tender and really from that emotional place, that's when it's easy to do the things that aren't, isn't it? And you're like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But the real stuff when
because
it's really close to your heart.
it becomes real because now, like it's been, in you the whole time, you've been working on it, but when it's time to close it off, that usually means time to publish, time to release, time to let it out into the world. Now you're opening the possibility for judgment. So it's going from that possibility, so everybody's going to love it, to, uh-oh, what if everybody doesn't love it? Right? It's that transition. That's why it's scary. That's why so many creatives, in my opinion at least, have trouble closing projects and closing,
Yeah.
because they don't want to go back into that hurt stage where they, received all that criticism. But
Mm,
the thing is that if you don't learn how to do that, then you can't ever share your work. Now nobody gets to see it. Now you don't get to go to the next level, the next spiral. Because
yeah.
so sometimes, yeah, closure is a great word, but sometimes maybe we also have to see it as a new beginning, because now that project's going to lead to something different that you wouldn't have experienced otherwise, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, but it's almost like, again, it's like the seasons, isn't it? We can enjoy the spring and the summer for all that it brings, and the light and the play and the kind of out in the world, and the food and all that kind of spring and summer bring. But then we also have to have autumn and winter, and we also need to have the composting and the breaking down and the coldness and just going more inward in order for those new seeds to emerge. If we're always in the spring and the summer, constant, we'll just frazzle ourselves out and we'll burn out. And I
Yeah.
think that's often the gateway or the portal to this deeper layer of creativity, where you actually start to realize, I need to work on that autumn winter phase, but creatives often want to skip over those because it's far more interesting to get onto the next project and onto the next project. It's actually almost painful. Like when I think about that autumn winter,
Oh yeah,
it's like,
hard.
you know, it's hard, you want to skip off and go and live in the sun for the winter, but actually we need to learn the tools to work with those seasons
Yeah.
within us, and actually allow ourselves and to that's where the self-care practices come, I guess, to bolster those moments when we are feeling our most vulnerable when it comes to sharing or, wrapping something up, or it's actually that you know, knowing that you're going to feel feel the fear and do it anyway. It's a bit of that, isn't it? Because actually the real reward does come through the feedback and the reciprocity of sharing things. And if you're always keeping everything to yourself, it's from that fear protection place, isn't it? It's like, oh, and you can live in this world of possibility of all the things you might one day create, but actually you're not, you're just not putting something forward. Um, I think I find it hard when I put something forward because I don't want to be just judged by that one thing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm doing this one project, but it's like, but don't judge me by this one project because there's all these other things that I want to do. But actually, again, if you're always doing that, then you're never going to share anything. You're never going to let anyone see anything. So, and I've learned this through because I was in business partnership with my really dear friend Grace for like 14 years. And I think in a partnership, you kind of have to just get stuff out and you just move through that pain point constantly because there are two of you and you kind of have to. Whereas when you're then on your own, for me, working on my own now is when the real patterns start to show up, the real self-sabotage, the real wounds, the real pain points, because that's where I need to do that inner work in order to share, and it's amazing, isn't it? The more you talk about creativity, because you kind of think, I can remember going to an art gallery once with a friend, and that wouldn't kind of say they were creative, and they saw like an artwork and they just said, oh, I could do that, and you think, yeah, you could do you could do that, but like, what about that? The journey that has led to that scribble on the wall. It's like that's that miss maybe that miss honoring of creativity, which is the journey, right? It's not that end point of the thing in the gallery or the song that you hear. it's all it's all the spirals up and down that go.
Activity behind it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Creativity is such a unique thing. And
Hmm.
every project that you complete that's a creative project, like it couldn't have turned out the same way for somebody else.
Yeah, I love that. I heard so I trained at a place called the Red School, which talk a lot about the seasons, which I mentioned before, which is working with your own inner cycles, as particularly so it's a school for women working with their monthly cycles and really working with those energetics within our creative practice. But they did a course recently on creativity, and they described our creativity and our projects like the waves, but our creativity is the ocean. And I
Mm.
just thought that was so lovely because there's going to be all these different waves and they're going to keep coming and some will happen, some won't, someone else will do, or whatever, and they'll keep coming. But there's this sea that is the ocean, that is you. And there's something so beautiful to me about that. And maybe that's where that place of trust comes, that place of the deeper knowing and the wisdom, um, but it needs to turn into some waves. Or maybe it doesn't, and you just sit with it and that's you're happy with that. I don't know. There's everyone's different, right? As well. And everyone has different capacity and different timings and different moments when they can or can't create. And I think a lot of the time people will compare themselves as well to others and where they're at and what capacity they have. But I'm amazed by people who continue with a massive house renovation while trying to keep up all their creative projects while having two, three children and a sick dog, or there's only so much that we have at any one time. And I think that's that real conscious creativity where you're really acknowledging and honoring the humanness of time, of capacity, and giving yourself credence, that word again, to kind of be human and to not be able to do it all and not burn yourself out as much, because that burnout is just so painful. And I think we're a culture that works on that do mode, always be the same and always show up the same each day. And as as creatives and as a woman, I know that I'm not the same each day. I have times when I have more capacity than others. And I think to acknowledge that is to acknowledge the spiral and cycles of life,
Yeah.
and actually to build in the structure to give yourself that space and time off when as and when you might need it. And that's a big part of my creative practice, to build that in with my hormonal monthly cycle, because I know I'm not going to have the same capacity on one day compared to another, because I'm not a machine. I'm a living, breathing part of nature. And nature works in cycles, it works in seasons, it works in expansion and contraction. And I think that's a really powerful and really key part as we maybe enter in a world that honors nature more, is to really acknowledge that wisdom and intelligence of the cycles and the rhythms of nature, and that we're part of that. We're not something that's separate that can just be in our machine mode, that wants everything regimented and exact and organized and stripy. We can dip into that mode, but we also need to go back to that rhythmic, that is what's really leading the world. I mean, we're all fractals in our DNA, in the galaxies, in the way a seed grows. Everything is spiraling and emergent, and that's hence why I've called my next company Spirals, because to me it's a symbol of hope in a world that's got too stripy and linear. We are these creative spiraling beings, and that's that place of play and experimentation. And but we need this, we need the stripes as well. That's my children's book. It's about a spiral and a stripe.
I
You
love
go
it.
on a journey.
When are you getting that done, by the way?
Oh yeah, oh dear. Well, I have to look at all my childhood trauma. Got to do some more EFT tapping to get it out. Now I keep saying to myself, next Christmas, and I'm not.
I'm
Thinking.
gonna revert to that at some point. No, but actually what I was thinking of as we're kind of wrapping this up a little bit is
Mm.
it's one thing that has really helped for me is to get into that next level of, I guess, companionship with the right people who are very similar
Yeah.
to me and very aware of how the creative process works and very encouraging and provide sort of that trusted environment for me where I can then allow myself to go in as a child and play and have fun and not have to worry about criticism. So,
Yeah.
there are a few people I would say in my circle at the moment where I know that I can go to them with any creative project and it can suck or it can be amazing, but they're
Hmm.
not going to pass judgment on it because they know it's in that baby face and they know that it takes a lot more time for ideas to develop. And, you practice, you get better, this and that, right? Things, they understand the process enough because
Yeah.
they're in the same place, right? So they could come to me, I could go to them, and I feel like having that type of support network also greatly helps because then if you've gotten feedback as you're working on things throughout, that
Hmm.
edge that you're going to stand on when it's time to release something, it's not going to be as scary of a jump,
Hmm.
right? Because it's almost like, it's kind of like doing when I do beta testing, right, for my courses. Like,
Yes.
so when you're a beginner, you think, oh, I'm going to create this course or whatever, and it's in your head and you're writing it yourself and you're in a silo and you don't let anybody see it and then you release it. And then if the feedback comes, you could have benefited from that outside perspective a lot earlier because maybe that's
Yes.
not what they needed to hear. Maybe they needed something else, but you assume because you were just closed off in your own little world. So the more
Hmm.
you share, I think, in the creative journey, and
Hmm.
again, this is a tricky thing because we tend to be,
Hmm.
again, perfectionist because we don't want to be judged on that one project or, we've heard criticism before or hasn't been valid or this and that. So we're very
Yeah.
scared of that, I guess,
Yeah.
or vulnerable to that. But I think if you find sort of a crew where you can
Hmm.
feel free enough to play and share ideas that are not fully baked yet,
Yes.
that right there is a huge win because then it's not like you just shared a different iteration of the project, but it's not like never shared it with anybody and then it's like you're going from cold to warm right away or it's
Yeah.
contrast. But if you have something that you're working on and you can share it with somebody that is going to be encouraging, it's
Mm.
not so scary then to release it because somebody's already seen it and they were okay with it. You know what I mean? Like it's just a
Yeah. I
very
love that.
important network to have. And I'm so excited that I have those people right now. They weren't always there, and it was a lot worse, I guess, more worrisome and scarier to do things on your own. It's not so
Mm.
scary anymore.
And I'm curious about that. Was that a very intentional kind of, what form does that take? Are they individual relationships that you go to for, say, can I check in with you about this? Yeah,
Hmm.
that's lovely.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I intentionally sought that out because I realized that I was in this creative journey, but I was a bit alone. Not,
Yeah.
and I was like,
Mm.
I really wonder, like, I couldn't self-judge. It's like, I think I might have something here, but I don't know if this is good or not,
Yeah.
because I'm new to this,
Yeah.
where I'm trying this for the first time. And then when you hear feedback where people go, actually, yeah, like there's something there, that's really good. That encouragement fuels you to go,
Totally.
lean into it more and go, oh, okay, so I wasn't imagining that. I am
Mm.
maybe good at this, or I'm better at it than I thought, or there's something that they think is valuable here, or that could be of service to somebody, or it's worth pursuing somehow. I think it gives you a little bit more of the confidence and support in a very judgy world to actually
Yes.
do things. It's
Hmm. I think that's lovely. It's like, again, it's that buffer, isn't it? That buffer of community. This is the power again of like the power of community when we're trying to be creative
yeah.
is to get that feedback and to have those I think in the artist way she calls them believing mirrors, people that believe in you and that see your value and also will give you honest feedback because we want to hear the honest feedback, right? But again, we're taken often right back to school where we weren't, well, we may have been, but we might also have had our creativity totally ripped to shreds. And I think um I think, yeah, that power of the support network is so beautiful. It makes me think it'd be good to, I mean, that's obviously what the role that a coach can have, but you can also build that in yourself. It doesn't need to be something that you're paying, paying money for. You can actually just have that as an exchange between friendships. Or I had something with a friend that we called Sharia, which was our sharing area where we would just share where we're at with different creative projects at any point. Yeah. And I think there's that thing of body doubling too. So not feeling like you're just on your own constantly when you're working. And I found this online community that I was telling you about where you can just be working and there's other people working on Zoom. And it's like you don't know them, but someone's doing their PhD, someone's writing some Instagram things. I might be drawing or preparing a new workshop idea or whatever it might be. And there's something so lovely that remembering that you're not on your own, because I think the creative path can feel super lonely and super confusing and again overwhelming. But I think when there's that softening, isn't there, when you realize you're not on your own, that other humans see your value, or just that they're in their house as well, just working away and in real time.
Yeah.
I
So,
think there's something that lifts the lid on our separateness. I think actually there was something so, for me, so healing in just seeing that whole group of people, just like, oh yeah, you're just all getting on with your stuff too. You're not all out doing something much more fun.
well, no, and it helps each other, you help each other be expressive and
Yeah,
like when you and I talk, just like with some of my other friends and colleagues and clients, right? Like it always sparks new ideas
yeah.
because that exchange, you see a different perspective and you go, oh, I didn't think of it that way. And then that starts in
Mhm.
the back of your mind churning. And then all of a sudden you have another creative download because of it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many blog posts I've come up with just talking to you. Over all these years. And the same for all of my other friends, right? I think we fuel each other too as creatives. So finding some of those people that you can connect with and like you said, share and just
Mhm.
update where you're at. Yeah, I think we all need a little bit of encouragement, especially that lonely, wounded child that maybe didn't get as much encouragement as she wanted.
Yeah, yeah, and it's that kind of collaboration over competition, isn't it? I think there can be that, again, you remember at school when you're like doing
Hmm.
your work, is you have to kind of protect everything. There's also, again, that self-belief that no one else would do it exactly the same as you anyway. And actually the opening up and sharing and, sharing resources, sharing ideas is again part of this world that I think needs to come through, not one that's going, no, that's mine, and I own this, and that comes from a place of fear and separateness. And I think, yeah, that's not the world that I want to see coming in. But it's hard to kind of work with that sometimes when you're just on your own working. But I think that is an illusion of separateness, which I think again why I find those communities and why, and I love my new space that I've opened here, because people come in and you just have real human interactions, and the humanness of these interactions is where the beauty of all of it is, right? That's how it comes into being. That's through other people. Life is relational, which again for me is represented by the spiral. It's like we're in relationship with everything, and when we forget that, we get isolated, we get stuck, we get lost. And actually that opening up to that much more interconnected, collaborative, creative, curious way is the path for the creativity, I would say.